I've always admired James. He's one of my favorite filmmakers. I think he's one of the greatest filmmakers alive. I've always wanted to work with him. We'd met over Zoom. I was in Denmark. He was in his backyard in Los Angeles, and I felt a sense of affinity and kinship with him immediately. And then I think a month later, I was sent this script and was really just thunderstruck by it and by its sort of quiet beauty and profundity and yeah, and then I started to work on it.
And for me, it was the beginning of the pandemic, and I got a call from my agent, Josh Lieberman, and he said, I've read something really, really special. And it's being made by a filmmaker called James Gray. And I said, oh, I'm familiar with James's work. It's wonderful. And he said, well, he thinks that you might be right for one of the parts. He's not sure. I said, all right. So he said, so would you consider speaking with him? I said, of course I would speak with him. So I can't remember if it was a phone call or a Zoom. We definitely Zoomed eventually, but I read the script and I loved it. And we met, and shortly thereafter he offered me the role, and then we just began talking. We would have ideas, and I would ask him questions about his life and how I would, to just understand more deeply the character, and he would consider them and come at me, and sort of slowly we established a connection between us, because we didn't even have to say it, it was just understood that this wasn't to be a recreation of it was on a documentary level. I was allowed to interpret the character, but I wanted to interpret it from the perspective of his memory of her. And we built that, and then we wound up shooting it, and now we're here, so quite an experience.
Honestly, I think just that how daunting it was as a challenge to play the father of this filmmaker, and to exist in the space with him, and to inhabit a character so fully that hopefully the director can suspend his own disbelief and revisit the past in this way. The character is described when you meet him on the page as a Jewish Stanley Kowalski with an engineering degree, and I thought, well, that's a real, grab bag, and says so much about someone, because Kowalski is obviously a brutish man with violence in him, and also tenderness and love and trying to sort of create, what James wanted was the most vivid and richest possible expression of these people. So that was a gift as an actor.
I'm a sucker for contradiction. It's one of my favorite type of roles to inhabit. Someone who is very clearly two ways that contradict each other. And in this case, someone, and really, if you take a step back, I believe that the thing that drew me to the character was how much she loves her family. And the thing that fascinated me about the character is the ways she had available to her to love them, which very oftentimes express themselves in anger, stress, violence. And I think it's very important not to judge the past, but rather understand it, and appreciate in my own life the privilege of having an education that has allowed me to make other choices. But at this time, those choices weren't available. And so it makes love a very complicated thing. And I thought this is going to be very challenging. It's going to be a very rigorous experience. And it required tremendous trust between everybody, and openness and experimentation at times. And that was what drew me to the character, was just all of that.
I was so moved by it, and it felt like great scripts do, that there's a sort of deep underwater river running through it, the subtext of it, and the sort of mute pain of these characters, and the way that every character is sort of brought to a crossroads moment at the same time that the country is brought to a crossroads moment. It was very sort of epic, and yet so intimate.
I wish I could give you a simple answer and say it was just one thing, but I think the thing that I responded to initially was how authentic it felt. You know, Jeremy and I speak about this often. We do not live in the world in which we were born. We find ourselves in different circumstances. And I don't wish to misrepresent my childhood. I was not hardscrabble by any means. But reading the script and seeing an honest portrayal of people who want so much what everybody wants, which is safety and security, and the stress of not being able to provide those things, which, again, not meaning to misrepresent my childhood, I felt growing up, to a certain degree. And then realizing that that story iterates itself in different ways across America, and the further away that you get from the center, the harsher it gets exponentially by different factors. I was incredibly moved by that, and angry, and appreciative that it was being told with such clarity and such a light hand.
(1980), leading up to the election of Ronald Reagan, a moment in time. You know, the title of the film is from the song by The Clash that came out in, I think, 1979. It was about sort of the specter of nuclear war and the sort of apocalyptic feeling, and then in a small way, the apocalyptic events, seismic events and upheavals happening in the life of this young boy, you know, in consonance with the life of the country. But it was sort of a prefiguration of the time that we're living in now, in terms of the politics and the racial divisions, and James uses this very personal lens and sort of historical lens to tell a much bigger story about our society. I don't think that James is, you know, the film is not a polemic, but he's taking this sort of insoluble problem that remains an insoluble problem, this total Gordian knot that we're all still in the middle of, and trying to puzzle through it by asking all these questions and by, I think, implicating the audience. I think we're all put into the situation in a way that Paul is in, and that these parents are in. Sorry.
I don't think he puts you in the audience. I think you discover yourself inside. He doesn't put the audience in it.
No,
I think
right.
You just, without noticing,
yourself.
you discover yourself inside of it.
Yeah.
You know, I think if he'd put us in it, I think we would have all resisted. But that was to me, one of the most brilliant parts of the film is the way you find yourself in it. Would you think that that's true? I don't mean to contradict you. I'm sorry.
No, it sort of nets us in, and we're all
somehow
implicated.